Yeah, those photos were taken of me last week. And week and month and years. And the last shot was, I was so privileged to sit in the bus, the very seat that Rosa Parks sat in, when the bus driver told her to get up because a white man had come to sit down. And she was already in the section reserved for the colored people. Everybody knows who she is. She loved the law so much that she broke it. Nobody remembers the bus driver who had the law on his side and what his name was, James Blake. And it just goes to show you who's remembered in history and for what reason. And some of those others pictures, I'm going to swear you to secrecy. Yeah, you know, it's an era gone by, times of real happening. And I feel very privileged to have been at the 20th anniversary, Jobs, Peace, and Freedom. Now here we are, 60 years, when Dr. King stood up in a very fearful place, and he preached the I Have a Dream speech. Exactly 60 years to the day. There's so much said and written about Dr. Martin Luther King. It's as if he did everything right and in life did absolutely nothing wrong. As if he's the greatest patriotic citizen of our country for all time. It doesn't matter that the people that admire Dr. King have never read even one piece written by him. That's like there was a time when he opposed the war in Vietnam at the Riverside Church exactly 1 year before he died, April 4th, 1967. And it was such a difficult thing for him to do because he was going against Lyndon Johnson, who was a friend of the movement, and Coretta Scott King, his wife, encouraged, insisted, twisted arm somewhat, and said, no, you've got to do that. Threat to justice anywhere is, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice anywhere. Well, I'm sure you read about it. I'm sure you know about all these things. Back in the day when those 4 children were getting ready for choir, there was a bombing in Birmingham. They died. And then he went in to have a march, and 8 clergy, some of them rabbis, some of them, 2 were Methodist bishops. They implored Dr. King to get out of Dodge, get out of Birmingham. Not that we don't agree with what you're doing, but it's your methods. And we're trying to do some things here, and you're an outsider. We're trying to help out. Well, they wrote that in a full-page ad at the Birmingham Post. Then, on the corners of newspapers, with pencils smuggled in by his lawyers, because the prison officials wouldn't give him any writing materials, Dr. King wrote back to these 8 clergy in another document I'm sure was little read by anybody, letter from a Birmingham jail. Attorney General Robert Kennedy, after he read it, said it was the greatest civil rights document ever written. Most Americans have not really read what he's written or how he has led the Southern Christian Leadership Conference to eradicate Jim Crow. It's sad, but they have not read that. Few people have read the I Have a Dream speech or the book Why We Can't Wait. Oh, it's true, we like quoting the one-liners that Dr. King has left us with. But a very small group of people have never read anything at all. The impact of his words. Today, 49 states in the United States honors Dr. King's birthday as the closest to the 3-day weekend of January 15th. Now, you might say to me, Oh, but Jack, you left one state out. Yeah, that's true. The great state of Mississippi refuses to honor the national edict to celebrate a day to honor this man. Mississippi, the leaders of the great state, have decided to ignore Dr. King on January 15th and honor Robert E. Lee, January 19th. You know him, of Confederate War fame, married into a very rich family, the Custis family. Well, now we all know that the Confederates lost and the Union won. We know that. But in Mississippi, this mean-spirited action was a racist response that they hang on so tightly to their motto, the South shall rise again. Wow. Well, there's only two problems with that. General Robert E. Lee committed treason, punishable by hanging, when he turned down Abraham Lincoln to lead the Union forces. And he decided to lead the Confederate forces. And one other issue, which is probably a smaller problem, Robert E. Lee never once set foot in the state of Mississippi. I actually thought it was a miracle that President Ronald Reagan signed into law on November 2nd, 1983. It would take effect a couple of years after. Martin Luther King Day would become a national holiday, the first time ever given to any one person in America. What a national recognition to honor somebody. And his advisors pointed out to him, we have a lot of problems with something called Iran-Contra. Now, if we do this, it'll divert attention from that. Well, they were wrong. Everyone knows about both. Not everyone was supportive of making the day a reality, though. You know, there were people opposed to this day. There were legislators and business people and education people and, of all people, clergy were opposed to it. We should not designate this day as a national holiday because of the very reasons that they opposed it were the reasons that caused it to become so. Some people felt he was apathetic and sophomoric. Others felt he was the father of civil disobedience. And he did much damage to the political order when he incited riots and he did much damage to trotting off to jail in pinstripes to gain the support for his cause. Well, the problem with that is that Henry David Thoreau was the father of civil disobedience, not Martin Luther King Jr. But these leaders ended up on the wrong side of history. You can never recover politically from your position once you take it, if you're a public official. Even if you change your mind about certain things. And I felt sorry for the governor of Alabama, George Wallace, who changed his mind and felt that his positions earlier in his career were not the ones he should have taken. You know, segregation today, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever. But even though he denounced that, he's remembered for that. And still others said, nah, you know, he's naive. And he had his moment opportunistically. And in their minds, if it wasn't for the civil rights issue, well, he'd be just a fish out of water. And that's all over now, right? It's all over. Well, wrong. Will somebody tell me when the civil rights struggle ever ended? It's a fact that Dr. King did take stands on issues nationally and internationally. They were not popular. Where were the TV ministers that we saw on TV as Dr. King was marching through the South getting his head kicked in? Nobody joined him in the condemnation of the war in Vietnam. And his staff even said, you know, you're really stretching things here because Lyndon Johnson is a friend, and this is going to hurt the movement. And Well, even today, some of these very well-known and famously wealthy televangelists, strangely, that they're silent on matters that deal directly with the core fabric of society and our well-being. Some issues facing today are so imperative, it seems that all leaders of every aspect must respond. So where are they? Well, lots of clergy have stories in their sermons about being on Air Force One. I'm telling you, it's intoxicating. I've never been on Air Force One, but many have. And imagine, you're the minister that's leading the presidential prayer breakfast at the White House. Wow. Now, being that close to world power, yes, it's intoxicating. And if you don't critique the established order, what you're doing merely is blessing it. Oh, heavens. What if I don't get another invitation to be in the Oval Office with the president and have my picture taken with him? Oh, it's very, very intoxicating. Yeah, it's true that Dr. King did go to jail for several courageous reasons for nonviolent civil disobedience. Now, as important as that was, he would like everyone to know the remembrances that were important in those confinements. People thought they were never going to see him again. Richard Nixon was a close friend of Martin Luther King Jr. I didn't know that till just recently. And he tried to find him. And who got the credit? John F. Kennedy. Because Dwight Eisenhower said, I'm not helping him. I'm going out and I'm getting on the golf course. And I'm just done. It was very close to him finishing his time. 8 years as president. Now, Dr. King held a deep commitment to truth as he stood up against a scornful nation. Dr. King never practiced selective obedience, as Dr. Norman Vincent Peale had stated in the Marble Collegiate Church. You know, Norman Vincent Peale, Guidepost magazines. Don't elect the Catholic president because you don't want the Pope running things. I mean, he said these things. It's not me saying it. And we used to say in seminary that Paul in the Bible was very appealing. Paul is appealing, but Peale is appalling. I mean, Dr. King loved the law so much that he was willing to break it in order to strengthen its fiber of justice. Peacefully resisting unjust laws, openly taking the punishment. For it deserves the admiration, I should think. Not only that, but he said an unjust law is no law at all. Kind of right. Verbally and with his life example, he said true peace is not merely the absence of tension, it is the presence of justice. Now, some legislators all over the country, they cite financial reasons why we shouldn't have done it. But yet, I know a lot of people, take Richard Nixon, for example. He wrote his memoirs. He didn't give any money back for the money he made on those memoirs, and he was pardoned for an offense, federal offense, that he had to admit to in order to get the pardon. Well, Dr. King, most people don't realize, he donated several of his papers to Boston University before it was fashionable to do so, and he received not one tax deduction for it. And at other times, he had to borrow some money to pay his taxes. He gave away. He didn't get the slightest shelter or charity deduction or any of that. And people have said, you know, this man reminds us of an American Gandhi. I doubt we're ever going to see another one in our midst today like him. Now, that didn't mean that he had his shortcomings, because he had his enemies. Let's see, who was his biggest enemy? J. Edgar Hoover, who spread vicious lies to discredit him. Yet Dr. King pointed to equality without ever giving in to hatred. He promulgated a method of change that thrived on organized, aggressive goodwill that confronted evil and refused to be joined into its web of complicity. I like that. He demonstrated that truth, a deeper understanding of conflicts, and love, a systematic attack of specific injustice, while forgiving all the people involved, can mobilize jangling discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony of peace and harmony. His dream was one where people from all backgrounds could sit down together in love and negotiate issues to bring about reconciliation and justice. And I think everybody has been exposed to the I Have a Dream speech 60 years ago. Leaders of the movement created an avalanche of protests and the dramatization of a shameful condition of dehumanization. One race of people against another race of people. The speakers at the podium were given 6 minutes to speak, and Dr. King took 18. Now, I must have read that speech. If I read it once, I read it 500 times. And each time, I discovered something I didn't see before. And one line he spoke that I didn't pick up on until just recently. 1963 is not an end but a beginning. And I'm grateful on one hand for his artistic skill. What did he actually mean by that one sentence? Do you know what he meant by that one sentence? What do you think Dr. King meant when he said, it's not an end but a beginning? Anybody? Go ahead. Yeah, right. Good point. That's a really good point, because we'll never really know what he meant by that sentence, but on another level, it's just as well to look at his life and research the civil rights movement to come to a better understanding what he meant. Now, I was privileged as those pictures. I look the same. Yeah. I just been sick. Yeah, right. All right, get out the bread. Here comes the bologna. But I served as a volunteer coordinator of that march, Jobs, Peace, and Freedom, in 1983, and it was very significant. They had enormous amounts of people there. And I saw like people like Harry Belafonte and Charlton Heston. These people gave enormous sums of money to the movement. I was 9 years old when he gave that speech. Probably the most important speech of his life, and he was 34. One difference between the first march 60 years ago and today is the element of fear. It was no secret that in 1963, just being at the march, you could get hurt or you could get killed. And they made that very clear that the stress was enormous because people didn't like people protesting like that, and they were not altogether willing to give up any power. Well, you name it. People came all over. They were afraid, as they've never been before. And they boldly and bravely did come and ended up being imprisoned, like nonviolent civil disobedient arrest. And the time was for hours and hours and hours just to be processed out. Now, I'm going to go out on a limb here, and I'm going to say the greatest victories had to do with the Voting Rights Act, 1965. The 1964 Anti-Discrimination Act, the 1965 Selma Movement, and the 1968 Equal Opportunity and Job Housing Law. These things were sacred, and people lived and died so that they could be in effect. And now they have been gutted. And they say that if John Kennedy had lived, they were planning on a second Emancipation Proclamation signing 100 years later, after the first signing by Abraham Lincoln. We don't know if that's true, but we're told that. Now, these actions indicate advancements for blacks, but they most certainly demonstrated white progress beyond the heritage of racism. John Lewis, age 23, at the march, was told, don't give inflammatory statements because the Catholics are going to leave. And we want the Catholics in. They didn't want that kind of opposition or that kind of controversy. So you either cut out your speech or you risk losing them. Well, he cut out his speech because the Catholics were that important to be there. And they were very pleased to have them. And the police, when they were marching at the Edmund Pettus Bridge, one man beat John Lewis so badly that he cracked his skull open with his billy club. And all of America watched the savage brutality of white racist National Guardsmen attacking unarmed black people, peacefully marching for rights they were being systematically denied. By the way, the Edmund Pettus Bridge was named after a Confederate general. And at the same time, Dr. King was in danger of being killed. All of these ministers, Billy Graham and Robert Schuller and Norman Vincent Peale, Bishop Fulton Sheen, they were undermining and discrediting Dr. King. And even Stokely Carmichael of SNCC told everyone that Dr. King was really an Uncle Tom, and all black people should rise up with guns against white imperialist oppressors. Well, J. Edgar Hoover had secrets on all the politicians, and he could advance your career or crush you on a dime. J. Edgar Hoover worked hard to crush gay legislation, while at the same time he himself was a cross-dressing homosexual who was partnered with Clyde Tolson, his second in command at the FBI. Underage boys were frequently escorted into the basement lounge of J. Edgar's house for drugs and alcohol and group sexual parties. Now think about it. Who are you going to call when the director of the FBI is endangering the welfare of minors by plying them with alcohol, money, and sexual favors? Who are you going to call? Ghostbusters? Now, I doubt we'll ever really know why J. Edgar Hoover hated Dr. King so much and what the animosity was against the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. But in particular, it was Dr. King he was going after. And he decided to discredit Dr. King with the American people. He convinced his boss, Robert Kennedy, all of 38 years old, that it was necessary to bug Dr. King's hotel rooms, his houses, his places. And he did it in a way that Robert Kennedy did all he could to preserve his brother's legacy, the president. So J. Edgar Hoover built up on that, and he convinced Robert Kennedy to sign the order authorizing the bugging, because we want to help his brother, don't we? And Robert Kennedy bought it, hook, line, and sinker. Hook, line, and sinker. Now, anywhere else and any other time, that authorization would be scandalous. There are people today who feel, the Department of Justice is independent. Well, think again. Robert Kennedy wouldn't do anything without ensuring that his brother's priority was first. And he worked closely to make sure that happened. Well, even Richard Nixon said, we use the IRS to conduct audits. And, we do it on our enemies. It's routine. Just to cause problems for them or whatever. Well, one day, Dr. King received a package. Apparently, and this is the hard part, Dr. King had a special ministry to the sisters. And in the package that arrived, J. Edgar Hoover wrote that Dr. King should commit suicide because of what was in the package. There were multiple tapes listening to Dr. King be intimate with both white and black women. And the tapes, audio, not video, were incriminating and highly detailed, right down to the heavy breathing and moaning. And Dr. J. Edgar Hoover had high hopes he could convince Dr. King to kill himself. What actually happened, nobody could have imagined. Dr. King sat down with Coretta Scott King, his wife, and together, for hours, they listened to the tapes. And she endured painful revelations of her husband's infidelities, that which she already knew, and passionate lovemaking with other women. And Dr. King said to his wife, "What should I do?" And she strongly encouraged him to keep the movement as passionately as before. She saw right through the attempt to try to divide and conquer black leadership so that white people could continue to conduct their discriminating racist businesses, and as they had been doing for years. She made Martin promise her that he would continue the movement. And she was not at all concerned with whether he pledged to her his future monogamy. She knew he couldn't. In short, the devious plan of this powerful lawmaker of the FBI fell flat on its face. It made him look like a desperate fool for using valuable resources of the FBI to further his own plan to harm others without recrimination. And when Robert Kennedy was listening to them with everybody in the room, he kicked him out of his office. And he deeply regretted being lured in to sign that authorization. That was really classic J. Edgar Hoover, because you can't say that he did it alone. He had his boss sign the authorization. Well, I think if Dr. King were alive today, he'd be thrilled by all of you, because the broadening ranks in citizen groups who seek to perfect our government through protest, through investigation, through accountability and legal action. Average citizens rising up to the mandate declaring freedom is a constant struggle. We've struggled so long, we must be free. And now we are. Here we are, 60 years later. And you might say he was right. 1963 is not an end, but a beginning. You could say that was right. What I've learned through all of this is you're not guaranteed anything. Neither am I. Powerful sources who want to keep you powerless are not going to just become enlightened and hand over to you your rights and protections simply because you deserve them. No, you've got to fight for your rights. You have to fight for what's yours, guaranteed by the Constitution of the United States of America. The fight cost many people, including Dr. King, their lives. John Lewis used to beg his audience. I remember young people, he used to say, make some noise and get involved in important matters of a community. Well, Unitarian Universalists have been doing that for years and responded and are involved in many aspects that help make our society better. But we've come so far, and yet we've so far to go. As Robert Frost said, we've many promises to keep and miles to go before we sleep. It's true. The most segregated hour in America, Dr. King said, is on Sunday morning when people go to church. Now, I'm very privileged to say to you in summary, through all of his trials, through all of his tribulations, his was a beautiful life. The life of a man who belonged to others in the least of these. You might say he had friends in low places. His faith in the world destiny was a faith in spite of. He knew the goodwill that's buried deep within all of us, and he worked faithfully to create situations that would allow these good intentions to translate into good behavior through social and legal reform. He was a man, you could say simply, who dared to follow his dream. He taught us hope by saying we are all bound together in a single garment of destiny and an inescapable network of mutuality. We cannot walk alone, and nobody is a lonely island. Now, if he were alive today, no doubt in my mind that he would be the champion of ending war, to turn our swords into plowshares and study war no more. Between countries that can't find solutions for peace, for restorative justice, and for a peace which passes all understanding between human beings throughout the world. Now, I can just hear that melodious voice. You know, it's amazing, his voice. Powerful oratory, calling for people to be the people they know they're capable of being. Citizens in the free world. And this is his call for patriotic allegiance. He said, the people who sat in darkness have seen a great light. Our only hope today lies in our ability to recapture the revolutionary spirit and go out into a sometimes hostile world, declaring eternal hostility to poverty, to racism, and to militarism. And with this powerful commitment, we shall boldly challenge the status quo and unjust mores, thereby speed up the day when every valley shall be exalted, and every mountain shall be made low, and the crooked shall be made straight, and the rough places be made plain. And then this shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together. Yes, the life and death and legacy of Martin Luther King Jr. is, I think, the many candles that still shines in the darkness of his death, to fascinate, to glow, to illuminate, and to warm. And above all, he taught us how to love. Thank you.